Welcome to the SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast. And this time we're going to talk about how to do debugging of SharePoint Framework solutions, or what are your options on doing the debugging when you're doing development of SharePoint Framework solutions, so including client-side web parts and SharePoint Framework extensions. Now, this isn't really around how do I do an F5 in Visual Studio Code or whatever is your editor. This is more around the actual debugging. So you want to make sure that you're able to step through the code and what are the options of doing that, depending on what are you actually building within your web part. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me today, responsible of the demo will be Waldek Mastercards. So Waldek will do the quick intros as well.
Sure. Hi everybody. My name is Waldek Mastercards. I am Office Development MVP. I work at Rancor, and today we'll talk about debugging SharePoint Framework solutions.
Indeed. So let's have one slide, and before we actually go to the demo, we kind of keep this relatively simple and relatively fast, so you can easily follow up on what are the options. And easiest way to actually explain that is really to show you that in practice. But let's actually have one slide, kind of going through the different options and considerations on this. Now, with SharePoint Framework Solution, we do have a local workbench, and we do have a SharePoint Online hosted workbench as well. Now, these are for client-side web parts. So at the time of the video getting recorded, these do not support, either one of them are not supporting SharePoint Framework extensions. We're looking into having that support at some point, so depending on when you're watching the video, SharePoint Framework extension support might be in the hosted workbench or even in a local workbench. The local workbench gives you the opportunity of doing SharePoint Framework Solution even though you would be in an offline scenario. So you're basically able to, for example, see the rendering of the web part, but you can't really connect to the SharePoint data because you're running actually in the local host, so you're not running in the context of SharePoint. The hosted workbench, on the other hand, is running in the context of SharePoint, so you will be inside of the SharePoint Online, so therefore you're able to, for example, get access on SharePoint lists and user data and all of that context, so you can then actually do development more complex scenarios within your web part. So quite often what we've seen, and I think Baltic can actually confirm this on his development as well, local workbench isn't actually that widely used because you actually quite often need to access SharePoint data. And people are being quite lazy, so even though in our tutorials we are showing how to use mock-up data, people quite often don't actually do that. Right, Walter?
Well,
depending on the scenario
of myself, I often build web parts that shows the weather or stock. So for that, I can perfectly do that in local workbench. But yeah, if you need to communicate with SharePoint search or items or documents, then you definitely need a context of the site.
Yeah. So I always wonder who's actually the weather web part or stock web part guy, but it's actually you.
Now you know. Now you know.
Cool. Now, the second option, so on the SharePoint Framework extension, so if you're doing SharePoint Framework extensions, placeholders or field customizers or command list view command sets, you are actually doing testing on the modern UI. So you are actually doing testing and debugging kind of against the live site, so to say, or live pages, or actual pages, the modern experiences. So you're loading your custom JavaScript, your developed in development JavaScript on top of the production pages, and then you're able to see how your functionality is behaving. And that's actually super cool. This is something which we introduced in as part of the SharePoint Framework extension release, which was 1.3 version, wasn't it? It was 1.3 in September last year. Releasing so many versions, I can't remember which one was where.
Well, you actually do. You actually do.
Yeah, thank you. So now, so that exactly the same process actually works for client-side web parts as well. And this is something which we haven't really documented that well in the past. It is actually now documented in the official SharePoint documentation, but we haven't shown this live, or we haven't actually covered this in the webcast or the videos that detail. But you can use exactly the same process with the serve config with client-side web parts as well. So you're able to say basically that, hey, even though I'm hosting my client-side web part from local host, you're able to load that on the modern UIs. So therefore, you're able to then see how your web part behaves in the context of the modern UIs. Because there are scenarios, there's functionalities which are not supported by the local hosted workbench or the local workbench. So you might need to do this to ensure that your web part is behaving properly without the requirement of deploying the web part to the app catalog, which is a great improvement. Anything what I'm missing there? Waldek?
Absolutely not.
Yes.
You covered it all.
Excellent. Covered absolutely everything around the SharePoint Framework Solution debugging. Now, there's a lot of different areas on the SharePoint Framework Solution debugging. What we basically wanted to do is cover the main options and show you the basics to get started in practice. There are then additional tricks and tools and tips which are partly documented in the official docs and partly documented also in the individual person's blog post. So please have a look on those as well. Like F5 debugging starting and all of that absolutely supported with SharePoint Framework Solution. But let's actually concentrate on, so to say, those three options which we saw on the previous slide, and let's have a live demo on seeing this in practice. So Waldek, take it away.
All right. So let's have a look how debugging SharePoint Framework Solutions would look like in practice. I've created a project with an extension and a web part, and I didn't change anything about the code. That's not the point. The point is how you would debug them in the different options that we have available. So first, let's start with the extensions. As we've said, currently you cannot, as we record this, you cannot debug extensions in Workbench. You can only debug them on a page. And whenever you add an extension to project, Yeoman will automatically add an entry to your serve file, and basically that will make it easier for you to load that extension on a page. Right. So here you see the ID of the extension that I have in project, properties, location, because the one that I've added is an application customizer, and also the URL of the page that it will launch. Now, if I would just run that in command line, let me quickly do that.
And while you're doing that, actually, well, let's just quickly explain this. These are the things in our old documentation in the guidance with before the RTM version of the extensions, and I'm not sure if we updated this actually on the docs. We guided people to use query parameters. So the config or the serve.json actually makes the use of query parameters not needed anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they're still there, but you don't need to craft the URL by yourself.
Exactly.
You just launch it and it works, right? So here, I am doing it on a Mac, but it works exactly the same on Windows. So here I would run gulp serve, right? Because I want to test my extension, and then I will add an argument that will say --config equals, and after that I will paste the name of my serve config that is tied to my extension. So in my case, I want to test extension name debugging banner, which is here, and that's tied to an entry here. So I will get this name, add it to command line, and we'll run this command, this task.
By the way, now it's heading to the wrong URL.
Correct, right? Because that's the default URL that you will get. When Yeoman creates project, well, it doesn't know the URL of your tenant, right? So it will give you default URL, right? And here, as you said, Bessa, originally we told you to craft all of this URL by yourself, add properties, and if you would grab that and paste it as a URL of your site, that will work, right? So here I am in a tenant. You will get a warning. You click through it, and we will get back to that. And it works. My extension should load. If it doesn't, then maybe I did something wrong in the code. Anyway, it should be right. So
you're using it wrong. So
yes, I'm holding it wrong. There you go, right? But that's the whole point, right? Or maybe, let me just try one more thing. Debugging live. Sites, home, SPFx. Maybe it requires the full name, site pages, not sites, site pages. Maybe it requires the full URL of the page. I don't know.
And typically, so like noted, so typically you do not need to do this by yourself in and pasting in the URLs and all of that, because you can just update the serve.json file.
Correct. And maybe I have another idea what it is. It uses dialog alert and there is bug in that, so that's why we don't see anything. So if we were to change this to console or window alert, hello from SPFx, here we'll be live debugging. That's always the best part of a demo, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Let's check if that's already refreshed. It should be. Shouldn't take that long. Yeah, there was an error there, but it's fixed now. Refresh the page. Load debug script. Yes, there you go. There is a message. So I'm not holding it wrong. And just to prove you that it works, let's see if we can use it without the page name. Remove this part. It's still loading, and it's working. Okay, so that part is fine, right? So you could craft that URL by yourself. But if you will add this URL of your page on which you would like to test your extension to your serve config, let us stop this one and go back to our code editor and go back to serve config, and let's change the URL of this page, because that's the URL of the page on which we want to test that. And that can be URL of the site, or we can add it site pages/home ASPX. Yeah. Save it, and then we will rerun the same command, right? So we will go back to command line, and here we'll run gulp serve --config. Let me increase the font of that a bit so it's easier to see for everybody. Gulp serve --config debugging banner, enter. And now we will run on the correct URL. It will still open in the wrong browser, prompting me to log in. But if I grab this URL from here and use it in Chrome, because I'm already authenticated here, let me just replace the whole URL, paste it here from command line. I will get the warning, and it's there.
Yeah.
Right? So that way, you don't need to craft that URL by yourself. You can just easily run a command, and it will give you exactly the right URL. Well, the challenging part is that you have to open it in the right browser, but we cannot change anything around that, right? That is a personal...
So, yeah, it depends on operating system. So in Windows, if you use, for example, Chrome, it opens the session in the Chrome window which was last open. So
if Chrome is your default web browser.
No, it doesn't. No, that doesn't have any impact on that.
Really?
Yeah. So
interesting.
But in Mac, things work slightly differently. That's
yes. Yeah, in Mac, Mac requires you to do more things by yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't think that much for you.
Such a typical
which is sometimes
thing.
good, sometimes it's not. Yeah.
No, just kidding. Now, can you go back on the serve.json? One point here to note. So there's two values by default here. So that there's the default configuration, and then there's the second value. So if you do not say config equals debugging banner, we kind of use the default configuration.
Default.
So,
yes.
So there's multiple ways of then you're able to kind of have variations of configurations, and then you're able to do easily testing against your extension. So how does the different properties will impact the behavior of the extension and all of that?
Yes, and actually that brings us to also an interesting fact, right? When you have like me extension and a web part, if we were to just run gulp serve. If you have only a web part, what you expect to see? If you run only gulp serve.
Well, in this case, the URL goes at least in a wrong location, but
exactly. But if you had a project with only a web part, you would see the local workbench, right? Well, you won't see it in our case because when you add extension replaces default config with the same as the one for extension. So you have exactly the same thing twice, but now by default you cannot access the workbench, right? And you can change it still. You can say, I want this to point to a local workbench, so this will be this part, and that will be localhost 4321 temp. I believe that's workbench.html. If I recall it correctly, and we can check it here. If we scroll to temp, we will see workbench.html. So let's save this, stop, restart, and we should see now local workbench. There you go, right? So this way you can easily switch back and forth between the config, and I could add the web part that I have here.
Yeah.
Well, I can
that's
now
the local workbench debug experience in general.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so that's the local host, and exactly here you can start developer tools, attach breakpoints, basically do debugging of the web part here, even if in an offline case, or if you would build an API or build a web part that uses third-party API that do not require the context of a site.
Yeah.
If you do build a web part that requires the context of a site, well, you can test it in the workbench that is part of your tenant. And for that, you could have another config here. So let's actually do this approach, right? So we would add here another config. We would say hosted workbench. And for this, we will use exactly the same URL of the existing site. Let's do it to here. And then we add to it _API layouts workbench.aspx.
No. _layouts workbench ASPX, not with the API.
Sorry. _layouts, not API. It's not an API. It's like,
you need to sleep.
What are you talking
about? Come on.
It's like, what are you talking about?
It's not an API.
Yes. Yes, you're right. I mean, yeah, when you work that much with APIs, you like think about APIs. No, it's not as you say, it's not API. It's a system page. Right, so with that _layouts workbench. And now if we go back to command line and start gulp serve -- config equals hosted workbench.
I have to say that whoever is watching this video can figure out how much we do exercising and testing on these demos. So
yeah. So let
this
me
is super scripted, by the way. All of these jokes are scripted as well. So.
Yes, it takes us way longer to think through all the jokes and glitches than actually the demo itself.
Yes, which are actually not even that funny, so we do apologize. So.
What? Yeah, and here inside the workbench, I am now in context of my site, which you can see also by the fact that I have a bunch of web parts that I don't have available locally. But here is my debugging web part that I can now add to the page, debug that, start developer tools. But the difference here is that with that I have the context of my site. I am authenticated, and with that I have access to all the data inside this site and even other sites within this tenant.
Yep.
And the last scenario that we want to show is the ability to test the web part on a page. Imagine that you want to test a full bleed experience of a web part. Currently, today, when we record a video, the workbench doesn't support that. Or things like imagine that the background of the page in your theme would be black. Well, that doesn't show inside the workbench either. Imagine that you wanted to test the workbench, how that work with other elements on the page. You cannot do that inside a workbench too, right? So there are different reasons for which you might want to test the web part actually on a page. And you can do it, right? So there are a number of ways in which you can do that. And the one is to use exactly the same approach as you would with extensions. And I have no idea why that's popping up because, let me refresh the page, I am not attaching anything. I am not attaching any query string parameters, and I still get warning. I can imagine there is cookie somewhere or a cache.
There's a cookie cached, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's stop this.
You can do reset in the query parameter. You can after marketing, you can do reset equals true.
Reset equals true, and that will
You clearly haven't watched my tutorial videos for extension.
Of course I not. Of course I have not. Sorry. And then that becomes painfully obvious, right? Yeah. So now here we just learned a new thing. So you can reset your state.
Now, Waldek, let me correct you on that one. You learned a new thing. Everybody who's watched the tutorial videos for extension development have already learned this. So.
Yes. Yeah, so now you guys know why I record videos with Vesa, because I want to learn new things. And that right, and in here we can use exactly the same approach, right? So here we have the hosted workbench, and we can copy exactly that thing. We can create new config, which would be modern page, and we can grab the URL of this page, and we don't need to add anything else. Because the manifest, let me just do it correctly, because the manifest will be loaded already by itself. So we do that, and then we will start a config named modern page. So we go to here, gulp serve -- config modern page. And we will get a URL that will open again in a wrong browser, but we don't care about it, and we copy it from here. Stop scrolling. We'll grab this one, and when I will paste this URL, we'll get again the warning, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. And now when I edit the page, so I am now on a modern page, right? This is not a workbench, this is a normal modern page. In here, I can look for debugging, and here I see my web part that I'm building locally. And I can just edit to the page, and I can test all experiences, full bleed. I can test themes. I can test it with other elements on the page, just as if it was a regular web part deployed inside a site.
Yeah.
All right. So the one thing that we already said a few times that we will get back to that is the warning that you get when you append this URL, when you choose to load your local web parts, and the warning is this, right?
When you use the debug manifest file, bypass the query parameter. Yes, absolutely.
Correct, yes. So allow debug scripts. And that's the important part, right? Because in theory, you could use this approach to test the web part on your live tenant in production. The one thing that you should keep in mind is at this point, you load your local scripts that haven't been approved, verified by anybody. Nobody has checked whether they are in accordance to your compliance standards, anything, right? That is your local script that you load from your local environment in the context of your tenant, giving these scripts access to anything that you as a person can access.
In the context
right?
of you, yes.
Exactly, right. So if you have access to a single site, any script that you load on this page could, in theory, doesn't mean it will have, but could have access to exactly the same site. Nothing else, right? It cannot do things that you cannot do by yourself as a person.
So basically, be responsible or think about when somebody sends you a JavaScript file saying, hey, do the following step and just put it in your site by loading this query parameter, and ignore all of these warnings. And even though it says, if you don't know what you're doing, click here, still ignore that one as well, and then load the thing. So basically what we're trying to say here, the warnings and everything else, for the developers, this is like, this is just for the sake of it, but these warnings are there to avoid the situation that somebody just randomly follows up without understanding what they're doing, stuff and guidance from internet, which could be wrong and which could be then impacting or adding a JavaScript to be executed within your site using your permissions. So these are really there to avoid that situation. This isn't really anything specific for SharePoint, because exactly the same kind of loading and site loading capabilities are with other service providers as well.
Yeah. So with that, we choose to load debug script because we are developers and we intend to actually do that. And with that, we allow you to test your local web parts in the context of a modern page on a modern site.
Exactly, which is really cool because now you can actually then see the behavior of the web part, even though it's still hosted from a local host. Related on the warnings, by the way, we can actually quickly do this. Can you open up the dev tools? You can actually see the same warning in the console. In here as well. The reason why these are here, this is actually the Facebook does exactly the same. So it gives you this kind of a warning. Please, 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 please don't do anything what you are not aware or you should not be doing here. So if you're a developer,
don't paste any blocks of code into here because somebody told you to.
It's almost like, hey, I read this blog post from the internet. Somebody said I should be going to command prompt and do C format C plus or C. And now my computer is broken. Well, why did you follow up on that guidance? So where did you get the input? So why did you format your disk? It doesn't make any sense. These are similar kind of warnings, trying to make sure that people think before they actually perform the actions. So, cool. I think that's it, Waldek, on this one. So now, great thing, you learned something new, I learned something new, everybody's learning hopefully something new from this demo. So let's flip back on the slide for a summary and close up the webcast. Thank you.
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you, Waldek, for that demo. And that was really around showing the local workbench and kind of like mentioned during the demo as well, the local workbench is really useful, and you can absolutely do actually even end-to-end development in the local workbench if you are hitting external APIs, like the weather web part is a good example, or if you would be hitting the GitHub APIs or non-SharePoint online APIs. Now, if you need to hit and get data from SharePoint, then you absolutely need to at least go to the hosted workbench, where you can then actually access the REST APIs and information in SharePoint Online. But then that doesn't really support all of the scenarios. So in the case of extensions, as an example, you need to anyway do development and debugging against the actual modern pages or lists and modern pages. And the same option is then available for client-side web parts as well. Please have a look on our official documentation that is referenced in the webcast notes, in the video notes as well. And please give us also feedback if there are room for improvements around these topics. Please use the SP DevDocs issue list for letting us know the ideas of improving the documentation. But Waldek, anything what I'm actually missing around the topic?
You said so much that there is really nothing to add. Well,
the only thing that I can say,
yeah. Well, the only thing that I can say is that you should definitely keep in mind that there are 3 options, right? Keep them in mind that you can host or you can test web parts in local workbench, hosted workbench, or directly on the page or in the list. And with that, different scenarios support different abilities, and it's important for you to know that there are all 3 available to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cool. Thank you, Waldek, for the great demo, and thank you for joining me again on this webcast. We will absolutely come up with a new webcast in the future as well. Thank you.
Bye.